What's going on, Hacker Valley fam? I am so excited to host this episode because we're talking about something that everybody has, but no one has the time or the patience to actually do the right thing for, even though it's something that affects us deeply, especially from a cybersecurity practitioner perspective. It's the workspace. We have traditionally thought of the workspace as just being a place that is going to provide us email and stop phishing. But the workspace goes a lot more and is a lot more expansive than that, whether you're looking at Google Workspace, Microsoft, you name it. But we're here to talk about the workspace and also the next evolution of phishing. Without further ado, run the intro.
Who says tech can't be human?
What's going on, Hacker Valley fam? Welcome back to the show. This episode is all about the current operating system for businesses and workplaces. We're talking about the workspace. We're talking about phishing. We're talking about protecting oneself, because that is what we have to do a lot, especially when we look at things like Google Workspace. And to kick off this conversation, I brought in a very special guest, someone who is well versed in corporate workspaces, enterprise security, and has helped many organizations be a little bit better at protecting their entire company. Our special guest for this episode is Rajan Kapoor, who is the VP of Security at Material Security. Rajan, what is going on? Welcome to the show.
Hey, Ron. Thanks for having me on. I'm super excited to be here today.
Excited to have you. I have been using Google Workspace for eons and eons and eons, and I'm sure you have as well. And there's just so many things that we don't do right. And I thought it'd be a great place to talk about some of those things that we aren't doing right and also what we can do to better protect ourselves and our companies. But before we get into phishing and Google Workspace, I wanted to give you a quick second to talk a little bit about what has brought you into this scenario today, whether it be, material security and being VP of security. What led you up to this point?
I got my start many years ago, before cybersecurity was even a thing, right? The internet was just starting to be something that businesses were leveraging. And I was on the IT side of the house. And as things matured and as as the internet became more and more of a tool, but then it also became a tool for attackers, I found myself being naturally pulled over to the security side. And then I really got to cut my teeth at a company called Dropbox, which was a massively scaled cloud service provider, and seeing all sorts of attacks and all sorts of adversaries there. And then ended up joining Material Security to help security teams across the world, do a better job of protecting what really matters to organizations.
I wanted to first talk about phishing. Phishing is one of those things that I feel like is in front of us for a little bit of time. It's intense while it is. And then other times it kind of goes to the side and we focus on other things like AI. But I think now is a good time to reorient yourself with phishing because a lot has changed. How would you describe the state of phishing, but more importantly, business email compromise today?
Sure. Yeah. So those are, I guess, two different things, right? Like, phishing has been a problem for a long time. And what's interesting is, for the past 20 years or so, phishing really relied on the same tools that we used for anti-spam. So if you remember a company called Postini way back in the day, it was eventually acquired by Google. They started off as an anti-spam company. And so we apply a lot of the same tools to phishing, right? Or did apply a lot of the same tools. And then all of a sudden you had this evolution occur, and Material was part of that, where you could leverage the API of a mailbox to do more interesting things with phishing protection. So the protections have gotten better. I'm not going to say phishing is a solved problem. It's not, but it's, the investments that have needed to be made in it have been made. And there's not much more you can do on the phishing side to really move the needle on securing your organization. You have to keep doing it, to be clear. I'm not saying, it's fine. It's not. But to really like start moving the needle, you need to look to other controls now. And yeah, then we'll talk more about that. But like those other controls are, like looking for example, business email compromise is as much an outbound problem as it is an inbound problem. If you have an account, that's the one that's being used to send business email compromise emails. That's what protections are you using to make sure you're not like the source of phishing emails versus stopping those emails from coming in.
I'm glad that you mentioned that, because there is a difference between phishing and business email compromise. The way that I look at it is phishing is a component of business email compromise. And business email compromise is like if my Google Workspace email were to be compromised, like then there's a lot of other downstream and adverse side effects like Google Drive and many other platforms. Is that a fair assessment and definition?
That's exactly right. When you are the victim of business email compromise, you could be one of two roles. Like I was saying, you can either be receiving an email that's trying to get you to do something you shouldn't do, or you are the source of that email going out. If you are the source of that email going out, you have a much larger problem called account takeover occurring. It means that the attackers are basically in not just the mailbox, but in the broader account, right? And they're going to do a lot more damage beyond just sending out malicious emails or emails trying to get people to do something that they shouldn't. They have access to Drive. They have access to communications that you have with your customers, with your vendors, with your partners. They can do a lot of damage. They can get a lot of data out. And your problem really isn't just the fact that that mailbox is being used to send, bad emails.
Just for that clarification, Rajan, what were you doing before joining Material? Like, what was your role?
Most of my experience has been on the corporate security side of the house. That's the systems that you use to run your business. And I think that was just a natural like progression from doing IT, right? You start worrying about laptops, you start worrying about like, accounts and the different software services that you're using. So, spent a lot of time like on the data security side, a lot of time on the corpsec side, and I kind of love it because it's the side that like interacts with your employees directly, and it gets you always see interesting problems coming up, but you also have to be super thoughtful about like the controls you put in place and how much they impact those employees. Because one thing I always like to tell my teams is like a minute that an employee has to spend like fighting a security control is like one less minute they have to spend eating dinner with their family because they still need to get their work done. So love trying to find like novel but user-friendly ways to help protect organizations.
You mentioned few less minutes with your family. I feel like every time you click on a phishing email, like that's what happens, right? Someone has a little bit less time with their family. But also, not just when you click a phishing email, a lot of times when you install an application, that could happen as well. You're kind of clicking a phishing email without realizing it. There's apps out there that are so helpful, especially today. It's the AI era. Who's not connecting their data and tools to some AI tool to help go through that information? Some of the tools though that we onboard, there's a ton of scope that they are allowed to perform, like reading our email, sending an email, deleting emails. From a adversary perspective, that's exactly what would make me happy is the ability to read, to send, and then delete. I'm gonna do that action if I have taken over someone's account. I'm gonna send my emails to my phishing list. I'm gonna then delete it out their inbox and just try to monitor and maintain. Is that something, and this is coming from someone that has an adversarial background, but I'm not sure if people in the adversary are actually doing that specific flow. Is that the case, or are we using apps to control and send emails on people's behalves? Like, have you seen that?
Why we're seeing this more now is attackers are pivoting. We've gotten pretty good at stopping account takeover from like a user like credential compromise standpoint. And what I mean by that is if you have passkeys in use, right? If you have like just any sort of WebAuthn like mechanism to protect your accounts, it becomes super hard to actually like steal someone's credentials and log into their account. And attackers are seeing that. And because auth has become such a almost solved problem, again, I'm not going to say it's solved, but we're pretty close with auth, right? They're now pivoting to other ways into accounts, right? And a really, really easy and kind of low-hanging fruit way to do that is a malicious OAuth app, right? These apps get scopes into an account. They're coming in via, the API. They're not, it's not someone logging into an account. And they get this persistent access that then, depending on what scopes were granted, could do a lot of damage, can exfiltrate a lot of data. And it happens like silently, right? To the employee or to the end user or to the account owner, right? Like they don't really see this like app interacting with the account. And so absolutely, like attackers are moving to different techniques. And right now, browser extensions and OAuth apps are like the attack method du jour for attackers. And we're definitely seeing this.
I have to jump in for a second to share a few details about our sponsor for this episode, Material Security. For the last few decades, email security has meant bolting on a gateway and hoping that it catches everything coming in. But anyone that's working in cyber knows that that's not the case, and that is not enough. The threats, they're not just coming through the front door or the back door. They're living in our workspace, they're living in our drives, and they're living in our third-party OAuth grants too. On top of that, most email security vendors, they charge a premium just to protect the perimeter instead of what actually matters, our entire workspace. That's why Material Security takes a different approach. They built a platform that treats your cloud workspace as a single unit. They secure emails, they secure files, and they secure the accounts, not as separate silos, but as the connected ecosystem that they truly are. The best part, it actually costs less than that legacy gateway that you're paying for at this very moment. You need to stop paying for a gateway and start protecting the workspace. You can learn more by visiting material.security. Thank you, Material, for sponsoring this episode. Now let's get back into it. So let's break that down, right? Hacker Valley, provide an app, and you log into this app using your Google Workspace. And the app that you've allowed to log in and you've used a login says, hey, I want to use Hacker Valley app to access your email and send email and look at your calendar. Does that mean that one key controls that flow? Is it a variety of keys? What was exactly like stolen and compromised from that SalesLoft breach and impact that happened?
Yeah. So what happened there is they actually had some keys in GitHub and their code repository, and the attackers are able to get those and then get production access to their app. So in that case, this was like a single key or a set of keys that were used to get access to an environment. What makes the OAuth stuff so difficult is actually just the fact that we don't have great controls. And I'm going to speak specifically like Google Workspace because that's the environment I'm most familiar with. But like in Google Workspace, there's not great controls to like understand what an app is doing. I mean, it's logged, it's there, but you'd have to like go and consume Google's logs, and like really create your own baseline for like how an app behaves in your environment, and then look for deviations from that baseline. That doesn't sound like an easy job, right? Like what security team is actually doing that, right? And so it's really hard to tell like what an app is doing and when an app has started doing something different from what it was doing before. And so short of like some threat intel feed telling you that, hey, this app was compromised, you're probably not going to figure that out for yourself. And so you get these apps and some companies are at differing stages of maturity. Some companies just allow their employees to connect to any app that they want. Some companies have an allow list that they have to work with. And in the situation where it's like any app, it's kind of like, it's the Wild West, right? Like what apps are my employees connecting? I don't know. Right. And then even when you have an allow list in those situations, like, when you have a supply chain attack that's successful, you've reviewed this app at some point, it's in there. You don't know that now it's under the control of someone who has malicious intent. and that app is just, starting to exfil data from your organization.
I want to get your take on an app that just came out that I think is going to change everything. It's going to create a lot of vulnerabilities, and it's something that a lot of people are using and doing without actually knowing all the implications and consequences. So what I have up is this tool and app called Moltbot. It was just called Claudebot two
Yep.
days ago. Here's the thing though, there's gonna be people that use this tool, and this tool is amazing. It allows you to pretty much take Claude code and I think other agents as well, like Codex and Gemini, and use them in places like Slack, use them in places like your email and Google Chat, etc. But with a tool like this, what it's accessing is it's hard to tell because it could be accessing local, it could be accessing SaaS, your web browser. What is your take on this type of technology, and like how do you see it fitting into narrowing in scopes on Google things like Google Workspace?
Yeah, it's super interesting because like, what once was old is like new again when it comes to AI. And what I mean by that is a whole class of problems that we solved for the internet. For example, like SQL injection, like things like that. Like they're now problems again because like, SQL injection is now prompt injection, right? Like getting like these apps to do the wrong thing keeps happening. People keep coming out with proof of concepts. They keep showing, like, oh, I can like get apps to like, leak data from this like mailbox that it's attached to, or the sensitive repository of data that it's attached to, because we don't yet have the proper security controls in place to make sure that what we're asking, like what these bots are being asked to do, should happen, right? And I think it's way too premature to start just attaching any sort of like, agent to your like mailbox or to your account. There's just not enough is understood about how that can go badly, and we know it can go badly. It's not this like theoretical like, oh, what could happen, right? Like we're seeing it go badly.
Full disclosure and transparency, Hacker Valley is using Google Workspace, and I'm not afraid to admit it because someone could, look up DNS records to find this piece of information out. However, one thing that I wasn't necessarily looking at too closely was our applications that can, perform login, or applications that can perform sensitive actions, whether it be in Google Mail, Google Docs, Google Workspace, and in general. Now, the best practices was great because like I went through this list and started to prune some of them. But what do I do after I do that, right? Like you just mentioned, this is not necessarily a once and done. This is a maintenance job that I have to, now start to think about. How would you recommend that I maintain this set of information before investing in something like material security?
Yeah, yeah, and you're not alone, right? Like, just want to be be empathetic to like you have a day job, right? And you're also like the admin for Google Workspace, right? And there's a lot of like security teams out there that are resource strapped, that are small, that are trying to do a lot for their organization, and wrapping their arms around like these other surface areas is something that's on their list. They're aware of it. I talked to a lot of security teams and they're all aware of this, emerging like problem, but in their list of things they need to get done, it's always like the thing they need to get to next, and they're not getting there, right? And so the very first thing that I recommend is move to allow listing, right? Like make sure that any app that like is going to be installed in your environment gets some sort of a review first before it can be attached to an account, right? So you move to allow listing. Your employees might have a ton of apps already wired up into your environment. That's fine. Just stop the bleeding and move to allow listing moving forward. Um, and then you really want to go and like do what you just did, which is get a handle on what's in your environment and pull out as much as possible. You want to reduce that surface area just as much as possible. And it takes a lot of work, right? It's going to be a weekend's worth of work if you're, trying to like review a whole bunch of apps that are already in there, but it's kind of critical to get done.
I've said this so many times, and I'll say it again here. No one should ever be trying to do this problem by themselves anymore, because the space is mature enough to invest in partners and really trust that they are going to be able to deliver. Like, like you mentioned, like there's not really a ton that has changed about how we can detect anomalies in our language from like a phishing email and, ultimately bubble up that information. But, I think there's all these other effects like having your Google Workspace, your OAuth scopes, locked down and make sure that it's understood from an app by app perspective. Looking at something like Material, do you all like constantly scan and then update the users, if there is a change in scope uh or apps?
The way we like tackled this problem was I'm just gonna like pivot a little bit here, which is we started off with like phishing, right? We're like, okay, let's like phishing is a critical part of workspace security. We have to solve that problem for our customers. And then we started moving over to more of like the Google detection and response space. And so this is broader than like OAuth, right? This is just like detecting and responding to events that are happening with your accounts. So this could be like an account takeover is occurring. This could be like an account is sending or behaving in like a suspicious or abusive way. And so what we try and do is actually like focus on like these bad outcomes happening with accounts and helping like, small security teams who can't necessarily invest in like a large detection and response organization, helping them actually have detection and response capabilities for Google Workspace more broadly, because it's not just about like OAuth. It is about like other ways that these accounts are being compromised, ways that your own employees might be making mistakes. One of the things we'll do is look for like sensitive data in Google Drive that's being shared in like weird ways, right? And like, I can't really think of a good reason to have like your company's payroll data in like a Google sheet with like a public link, right? I can't think, right? Like, please help me think of a reason if you know why. But like if you see that, like that should be shut down like immediately, right? Like maybe you do need to share this data like with an external party, but it should not be with a public link, right? So we've taken kind of like a much broader view of Google detection and response. Like apps are part of that. Your data is part of that. Email security is part of that. And kind of stitched it all together to give you this like broader view of what's happening in your Google Workspace and Microsoft environments.
Sometimes we're asked to share a very sensitive document to someone, and then we scope it down. You type in their email address into Google Drive or Google Docs, and you hit share. Then you go about doing your job, and then you get an email from that person saying, "Hey, I don't have a Google Workspace account, so I can't look at the document." What's like a good path to go forward from there and still keeping security in mind?
If you don't have a Google account, it might be time to sign up for one. I think like, like keep the data like in Google, but if let's say it's you're sharing with someone who's on Microsoft 365, if you really want to collaborate with them, it's going to be a bit harder, without bringing on like a third party service to do that. You basically just fall back to PDFs, but what you want to make sure you're doing is keeping that data in Drive. You don't want this data littered around your like endpoints. You don't want this data just ending up in weird spots. Like make sure that you're encouraging your employees to share through the existing mechanisms that exist within your cloud office provider. Because like, even though it's hard to manage today, once you get a tool to help you manage it, you want it all in one spot. You don't want this stuff like popping up in surprising places.
It's tempting. It's tempting just to say yes, whether it be your stakeholders, your customers. We're just always trying to like get our job done in as little time as possible without, escalating and then, causing a firestorm. But yeah, I couldn't agree more that asking is probably the best way. We're going to hit these friction points, but asking someone, hey, this is probably not a good look for me to open up to the world. Can you just create a Google account real quick?
Yeah. Yeah, just like, it's easy, it's free, it's 2026, just get yourself an account.
There's been some great friends that I've had that have really taken the paradigms from, being in enterprise security or enterprise IT and said, all right, these paradigms are disparate. They're not all connected. So I'm going to build something that's going to live on top of, the most essential pillar, whether it be your data, whether it be your Google Workspace. And I think, looking at Material, that's exactly where you all are. You're living right on top of Google Workspace. There's not really much information out there. There's tons on Microsoft, like how to secure your Microsoft environment. But looking at Google Workspace, I'll say that the space is less crowded, a lot less crowded, and there's the resources available online are fewer and far between.
Yeah, you're hitting on exactly why we kind of exist today, right? Google is interesting. So if you're a Microsoft 365 customer, Microsoft does a really good job of like giving you a UI or like different UIs and different products to like have control. What they don't do a really good job of, and we saw this in 2023 with a bunch of attacks, is like their infrastructure can actually be popped pretty easily, and was popped, and so you'll have like a whole bunch of controls in place that help you secure things from an end user perspective, but like the underlying data might still be at risk. Google is like the exact opposite. Like they had to learn some lessons very early on around securing infrastructure. And this goes all the way back to 2009 with the Aurora attacks that basically were like, I think, a watershed moment for Google. So they understand infrastructure security. What they don't do a good job of, in fact, they do like a really poor job of, is offering admins the right controls in UI to secure Google Workspace. And if you actually do want to do like a proper job of securing Google Workspace, you have to start writing your own detections against their APIs. You have to start writing, just like your own. You have to start ingesting their logging into like a SIM, and you really can't do enough in the UI today. And so, kind of like what we realized was, well, a lot of smaller teams and even like larger teams, like they just don't have the resources to go and like do this work, this volume of work around securing Google Workspace, because it requires becoming an API expert on Google Workspace. I talked to a threat detection engineer, and he said like every time he goes to a new job, he spends like the first 6 months rewriting the exact same Google Workspace detections that he had at his previous job. Uh, and so like that seems like work a security team should not have to do. And if Google had the right controls in product, they wouldn't have to do it, but they don't. So we kind of do it for them.
So if I'm hearing you right, there's things that you can't do in the UI from a security perspective.
That's 100% accurate. Yeah. I mean, even like it's just building like custom detections is hard. Um, Building like remediations, like automatic remediations, you can't really do. Well, like Google has a couple of options around DLP and stuff like that, but not really. Like even controlling these OAuth apps, right? Like in your environment, it's just a very heavy-handed like allow or don't allow, right? But there's like nothing in the middle of like like hey, like allow, but then like ask my employee every like year or 6 months, like, hey, are you still using this app? Like, can we get rid of it, right? Like Google creates a lot of operational overhead for security teams.
What are your thoughts on storing passkeys on hardware keys?
My point is just get move to passkeys now, and we can worry about the nuances of like where to store them like later. I prefer on device passkeys. I'm not sure if that's what you mean by hardware keys, or if you mean like an external hardware key. UB keys are great, right? Like putting a passkey on and using UB keys is awesome also. So, but I think we get caught up in this nuance of like where to do passkeys, and my point is just like do passkeys and like store them where you like and almost any mechanism for storing them today is going to be fairly secure. So just get there.
I couldn't agree more. It could be like, am I going to really enable this across my organization? Because I know that there's going to be a set of users that are disrupted. That's not disruption, I would say. It's education. Like this is a forced education, just like our yearly trainings that we have to do. It's just part of doing business.
I would argue that passkeys are almost like the perfect user experience though. Like once you get through that migration, like being able to just tap something to log in and that's it. That's a pretty good experience for an end user, right? Like no more remembering passwords, no more password rotations, no more like nonsense around like just like, credentials. Just I have a passkey and I'm into this account, right? Like it's more secure for them, makes it harder to phish them. It like just like it makes their experience, again, going back to that, like every minute spent tapping like Touch ID is so much faster than sitting there trying to like log in with credentials. So I strongly recommend getting there to everyone listening.
It's still one of those things that's loaded. I was just talking to my mom and my wife about this exact topic and why it's easier to use it, but they didn't agree. They didn't see it. I think you have to build that muscle a
Yeah,
few different times.
I didn't even ask my parents. I just moved them. I just sat down with them and I moved them. I said, "Your face will now like log you into everything. So just like, go ahead and do that." And I did not. That was nice of you to give them an option. I didn't do that. So
Yeah, and it's so interesting to see non-technical employees set up their user accounts because they'll see, do you want to add a passkey? And I think when people hit yes, a lot of times they're not even reading that dialogue. They're just trying to get all the things out the way.
if your phone gets stolen and you've got like Face ID on there, right? You're gonna be pretty good, right? Like, but if you've got like an easy to guess like password at the same time, right? Like that's not going to be great. So like just do like a really strong like passcode to get into your phone and then just have like Face ID take care of that most of the time for you. You don't really have to enter it that often. So um and then like the Target supports passkeys now, right? Like it is a consumer experience. So just go set it up.
So you're someone at an organization. You've gone through the basics of setting up, multi-factor authentication, maybe looking at your apps and seeing like, okay, I understand the scopes. Now I've narrowed them down and I have a good strategy for keeping those scopes narrow. Now I have my documents, right? I got documents and apps that are allowed to use this information. How long or how frequent should I consider changing those permissions? Like I shared that finance app, that finance doc, that spreadsheet. I shared it with the world. How frequently should I think about unsharing it if the world does need access to that doc?
Yeah, what you're mentioning, kind of like this life cycle management of data doesn't really happen today, and it should and it needs to. I would flip my answer just a little bit though, to say like one, when you first shared it, did you share it in like the most like secure way possible, right? Like, so let's say you needed to share it with just one person outside of your organization. Um, did you just use their email address, or did you do the easy thing and just add a public link, right? Like, like how did you share it to begin with? Did you share it as narrowly as possible, or are you taking on like unnecessary risk by sharing it like super broadly when that wasn't needed? So if you start there and you start with like good hygiene around how you're sharing this stuff, like you're reducing some of your risk. But yeah, that like going back and like considering like, okay, when should I unshare this? Like, I don't know of anyone who's actually like keeping a list of everything they've shared and then thinking like, okay, should I go and share this now? Like, I think that like the problem that we really need to address here is, and this is more for companies and individuals, but how do companies put in place that life cycle management of, hey, like you shared this a year ago. It has this type of data in it, and it was shared with like these recipients. Do you still need this to be shared? If you don't respond, then we are going to like remove the share for you. If you do respond and you do still need it, we'll ask you again in like 6 to 12 months, right? Um, Building kind of like feedback loops like that where the employee doesn't really need to think about it, is helpful. They just got kind of get prompted, and if there's no response, some action is taken for them. That's really hard to do with existing tools in Google Workspace and Microsoft 365, but like, I think it's necessary. And then the other thing is like at the moment of share, like finding and capturing like probably like sharing behavior that's like super risky, and then like sending a message to the user automatically and like letting them know that and educating them and be like, hey, you've put this financial data in a document with a public link. We've removed that link because this data is not allowed to be in documents with public links. If you need to share this externally, please share it directly with the people who need to collaborate on it with you. And then if there's like an exception that's needed, right? Like if the employer's like, no, I do need to use a public link. Here's why. It's like, it's super specific. Then like have their manager sign off on it, right? So if you start with like the initial sharing, and then from there introduce lifecycle management, you will vastly reduce that surface area or that footprint of data. But it's no security team's going to build this tooling internally to do this. Maybe a couple of teams have. I apologize. It is really like where you want to look to like buy something to just come do it for you.
Document sharing is one of those things that you're not going to prioritize the risk of unsharing a document and then creating a plan around unsharing it. You're just going to go in and do it. What are those areas of Google Workspace that don't need prioritization that you can generally go in and just make the change, and like it's fewer steps and fewer much less thinking?
Again, with the existing tools within Google Workspace, it's really hard. I think when it comes to like email, like a lot of companies try and put in like retention policies, which are not really a security tool. They're like more of a legal like tool, but they try and put in retention policies on mailboxes to automatically delete data after a certain amount of time, right? And what is not great about that is when like your employees get encouraged to like store data in places they shouldn't, right? Because they're like, oh, the email's gonna like go away. I need like all this data in here. They might not. They might just be scared that they lose something they need, and they start putting stuff in places that it shouldn't be. Now it's outside the controls of that mailbox, right? And so it's really hard today in Google Workspace and even in Microsoft 365, M365 to have a nuanced approach to like like reducing that volume of data that's just like lying around, right? And it's not until there's like some sort of incident that occurs that an organization then kicks off like an initiative to. I'll give you a great example. When Microsoft got popped in 2023, that Microsoft Corp got popped, their own M365 tenant. When that happened, they were still sending notices to customers like 8 months later, letting them know that their data had been included in this breach. And the reason they were still sending notices 8 months later is that was when they started going back and looking through every impacted mailbox to determine what data was inside that mailbox. And it was a very manual process of like analysts sitting there going through the mailboxes. And like you can make the argument like, well, why weren't they continuously monitoring what data was in the mailbox and like dealing with it on a per data basis? Like, so instead of saying we're going to delete all emails after 2 years, how about we just say we're going to remove any emails with like passwords, customer information, or payroll information after like 6 months, right? And just do like targeted removals of data from these repositories.
That's why you need a good partner. You need a good partner like Material, because doing this all by hand, teams don't do it. In fact, Dropbox team came and said, we want to do things the better way, and ultimately formed something epic, Material. I've followed Material for years. I've evaluated Material at companies when I was an enterprise security architect, and love what y'all are doing. For anyone that maybe listened to this episode that wants to learn more about Material and see if it's a good fit for them, what would your advice be for how to learn more and get started?
Yeah, come to our website, find me on LinkedIn, or just, come, ask for a demo. Like, we're always happy to show you what we're doing. I'm always happy to talk more about what we're doing. I think we're solving like real security challenges and operational challenges for security teams. And I get excited to show it to people.
I want to say thank you to you. I want to say thank you to Material. If you haven't done so already, be sure to follow Rajan and also follow Material Security. And with that, we wanted to say thanks again, and we'll see everyone next time.